Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to get started with the jobs forum, so if you can take your seats at the tables that you've been assigned, which should be on your badge. So if you're not sure where you're supposed to be, check your badge. What we've tried to do is split everybody up across different types of representative groups so that we've got a really good cross-section at each table for discussion purposes. I'd like to warmly welcome you all to the first of our Job Skills and Youth Pathways Forum. And just to give you, I suppose, a little bit of a background, I'm Kerry Sheets. I'm the chair of Sydney Hills Business Chamber, and on behalf of my fellow presidents and chairs and their executive teams from both the Hills, the Hawkesbury and Dural Business Chambers, I'd like to thank you for taking the time to participate in today's forum with us. This event is proudly sponsored and supported by the Hills Shire Council, and this really forms an important part of their economic development strategy around jobs growth, and it's also, we know, an important part of the Hawkesbury and of course Dural being a part of our Hills region strategy for growth as well. A little bit of housekeeping to get you started. Exits are marked, and if there is an emergency, just follow me because I'll be running out the doors. But if you need to use the bathrooms, they are back out through the main entrance that you came through. If you head down the hallway and head towards Pioneer Theatre, you'll see them just on the left-hand side. We will be taking a break between our two working sessions today, so you'll have a bit of time to take a break and a bit more tea and coffee, and by all means grab some more food at that time as well. So the format of today's event is very much a working forum, which is why you'll see butcher's paper on your table. So you're not going to have people talking at you all day from here. You're going to be here to work and to give your input. And so I know some of you have looked at some of the questions we put through on the agenda we sent out and to assist us in preparing for that. And I appreciate if you've taken the time to do that. One of the important reasons why we've put this forum together, and this is really the first forum, we intend to do further forums and working groups, is that this issue of finding people jobs and businesses being able to find staff has been a massive challenge across the entire northwest region, and of course all of New South Wales, before the pandemic, but certainly since it. And it doesn't really matter what industry you're in, you seem to have been struggling to find the right people with the right skills. And whether you're a young person, someone with disabilities, somebody returning to work, or someone who's in their 65 plus range and want to change the way you work, it is very difficult to find those connections and to find the opportunities. We've decided that we don't want to wait for policy to change with government, because we could be waiting a really long time to make it work for us. And instead, as a group, we recognise that the business chambers act as a linchpin to connecting education and skills to the employers and the industry bodies. And there's a wonderful chance for us to work together today on some practical solutions that we hope can be implemented in the short term and the long term, regardless of what policy is in place. So there's a couple of things we're really hoping to achieve, and you'll see there's a copy of the agenda and a copy of this information on the tables for you to have a look at. But we'll be breaking into two sessions today. The first session, we'll be talking about the kind of gaps and barriers that you see from your perspective, from your own networks, from your own roles and the people you work with on a day-to-day basis, to being able to bridge the gap between the development of skills, education, and then of course employment opportunities. And in the second session, we're going to focus on what we think some of the solutions could be. They might be short term, they might be interim, they might be longer term, and that may include some policy change. That's fine, but what we don't want to do is get hung up on policy. We want to look at practical solutions. Now, we're not going to solve all the world's problems today. We don't expect that. But this is the starting point for us to start developing these solutions and identifying those roadblocks. So we're really hoping that from today we're going to help you connect as stakeholders, and each of you are representing lots of different aspects of this challenging problem. But we're also going to be looking at what those roadblocks are, the practical solutions, and we will be producing a report after today of everything that you have gathered together at your tables, and we'll be sharing that with you all and asking you to continue to provide us input into this process, and we'll certainly be welcoming you back for further forums and working groups to keep working on this. Now, at your tables, you have a table facilitator who is a representative of one of the business chambers in the region. So if you're a table facilitator, can you just stand up for me so everyone knows where you are? Their job today is to help facilitate discussion at your table and keep to time. So we only have 2 hours and we really want to keep this short, sharp. So the very first thing that you're going to do in a moment after we've heard from our Mayor is to introduce yourself. So before we do that, I would like to introduce our Mayor, Dr. Peter Gangemi of the Hills Shire Council, just to welcome us and give us a little bit of perspective today.
Thanks, Kerry, and can I firstly thank each and every one of you for being here. I know how busy we all are, so for you to take 2 or more hours out of your time to help us identify these problems and find some potential solutions, I really appreciate it. Can I acknowledge Kerry and everyone from the Hills Business Chamber, from the Dural District Business Chamber and from the Hawkesbury Chamber of Commerce. We're all very appreciative for you putting this jobs forum on today. I do think it comes at a very important time for us in northwestern Sydney. We know that unemployment figures in this region are very low. Companies are finding it very hard to find staff. As a council ourselves, we should have 650 staff, but we've got over 80 vacancies ourselves trying to find staff. And I know there's stories like that across the business chambers and the small businesses that I speak to in this region. It also comes at an important time for us as a council. Last night at council we adopted our economic growth plan, and so that's a strategy for us as a council looking through to 2041. We envisage 56,000 jobs being created in this region by that time. We want more jobs that match the skills of our workforce here. We see some of the target areas being healthcare, education, professional and advanced manufacturing. The young people that grow here, how do we retain those people so that they have the ability not just to grow up here but build a life here and be able to work here as well. So these are some of the challenges we're grappling with as a council. So I'm really looking forward to today, everyone being able to connect together, being able to identify some of these issues in our own areas of expertise and suggest some of the problems that suggest some of the solutions that we can look at a level of government and other stakeholders can look at as well. So once again, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And as always, if there's anything I can do for you, please let me know. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Peter. So what we're going to do is we're going to get into the first of our sessions. Now, I'm just going to give you a little bit of preface so you know exactly what we're about to do. So your table facilitator is going to take a moment to ask each of you to introduce yourself. You need to keep it to 30, 60 seconds max, right? So start practicing what you're going to say. There's plenty of time to give people war and peace about what you do in the break, all right? I know it's hard. But then your facilitator is going to ask one of you to act as the scribe for the table. You're the person, if you volunteer to do that, who's going to be writing the responses down from the rest of your table, while the facilitator is making sure that everyone has a bit of airtime to share the things they'd like to share. So try and keep that nice and succinct. Now, just because you're the scribe doesn't mean you have to be the person that gives the debrief for your team. So if you say, I'm happy to be scribe, but I don't want to get up and spruik for it, that's fine, but someone else at your table will be asked to get up and do the debrief after each session, which is just sharing what your team has come up with, 1 or 2 key messages, and we're going to take that and we're going to put them up on the walls. So it is important that we try and keep to about 5 to 6 minutes for each of the key questions in these sessions. So try and be as succinct as possible so that we've got a chance for everyone to discuss, and then we'll take those discussions a little bit further later on. Now, your facilitators have already been given a bit of a brief, so they know exactly what to do, and Chris, who's at the back of the room, and myself will be wandering around, so if anyone gets stuck, we'll give you a hand. But we're going to start the clock now. I'm going to ask your facilitators to start facilitating. Okay, everyone, you should be now moving into question 3, which is where we're looking at the root causes of some of these challenges and barriers that you've identified, with a bit of reflection on some of those examples that we've written down there for your team. So if you could take now into question 3, We've got about 5 minutes or so to discuss question 3 before we're going to move towards the debrief for this part of the session. Okay, I'm going to give you 2 minutes to wrap up the conversation you're having, and then we're going to do a bit of a quick debrief with each table. Okay, we're now going to move into a debrief for this session. So, can I have each of the scribes grab your piece of paper and put it up where you've got maybe another piece of paper up there, so put it as your table number for us on the far wall. And then can I make sure everybody has at their table someone who's nominated as their spokesperson, please? Okay. All right, can I have the spokesperson for table number 1? Who's our spokesperson for table 1? Okay, so what I'm going to get you to do is I'm just going to get you to share one of the items that are in your challenge bucket, and then we're going to share one of the barriers as well.
To read it to remember what we spoke about. One of the challenges that we spoke about is that we focused on youth quite a bit just because of what we all do for work and our experience with our own teenagers/adult children, is that the youth don't know what they don't know, and whilst they're very connected on their devices, the connection's not a genuine human connection, so they're very disconnected actually to the network that we probably all benefited from when we were younger and actually talking to human beings. And so because of that, they don't have the same understanding of the importance of building a network around them and what comes from understanding other people's perspective and understanding pathways, and then we're dealing with a short attention span as well. And so they don't necessarily, I've got a 20-year-old and an 18-year-old, so I have to disclose that my perspective is very biased. But they don't understand that things take time and getting somewhere takes time, and so there's this immediacy and this rush to be a CEO and to have a $200,000 salary behind you within 18 months. And so that's a big challenge, is that we're dealing with all of that, and then we're dealing with employers that don't understand all of that and don't necessarily want to understand all of that. And if we just look at mental health alone, my generation didn't have mental health issues. We just had shitty days and we had to get up and go to work anyway. This generation is not like that, and there's a lot of benefits that come from that. There's a lot of great things that their flexibility and adaptability and open-mindedness that I think our generation can learn from. But that's the biggest challenge, is that we're dealing with this massive cultural shift in the generations, and you've got kids who don't know what they don't know and adults who don't want to know about what they know. We just want to keep doing things the same way, and I think until organisations and we all agreed, until employers and schools and everyone's working together to acknowledge the cultural shift that's resulted in this big disconnection between the generations, it's going to be really difficult to move forward.
And so that's also obviously the barrier. That's part
Yeah,
of
that
as
was
well.
our segue into the barrier.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. And what was the root cause? Do you think is that basically the root cause?
I lost my piece of paper.
Where were you?
Yeah, so I mean the obvious root cause is that knowledge. It's one thing to know it and acknowledge it, but it's another thing to know what to go out and look for to build your knowledge. And we all don't have time to do doctorates and get PhDs in cultural change and changing dynamics and dealing with difficult situations, but it's those pathways, like the people looking for employment. And we did focus on youth a little bit, but I think with any of these youth, the migrants, the elderly, we employ everyone at the RSL. So I think with all of this, it comes down to knowledge and access to resources, to know that you're doing the right thing and to know that you're making the right decisions, and to have the dialogue and forums like this, because people people don't talk about it. They don't actually know how to talk about it without offending anybody and being, you know, politically incorrect.
Fantastic. Good job, Table 1. Thank you for going first. Okay, so Table 2, who's your spokesperson? So preferably if you've got something that's a little bit of a different challenge or a different slant to add to what Table 1 we're talking about.
We just said things like no experience, that age-old thing that everyone's always had the problem with. Things like transportation, with the young kids, they don't have licences yet. Lack of business skills, particularly generated because of them being at home for 2 years during COVID. Lack of parent encouragement in some cases. Mental health and anxiety is huge in the young people. I've got a year 11 student I do Max Potential with, and you know, she did a survey and they're all massively stressed and full of anxiety. You're like, you know, you've got a lot more to come yet. Communication, technology, phones and all that stuff. Perception that young people are lazy, and often it is a perception. My 16-year-old stepson, he works his ass off. So like they're not all lazy, but there's a perception they all are lazy. There's some that obviously are. Barriers, migrants and things with English skills. A lot of people generally just with computer skills, visa requirements, reliable staff, people that actually turn up to work, turn up for an interview, that can be a good start. Completion rate of finishing apprenticeship seems to be a little bit struggling at the moment. Can be due to money or lack of interest. They're not paid enough, they can't keep up. Barriers, the participation award culture that we created. Hopefully that doesn't really come back again. Lack of focus on trades and want to be instant progressing up to the next level.
Great job, Table 2. Well done. Table 3.
Oh, I'm good. I don't need the mic.
Don't need that. Okay.
Yeah. I guess trying to touch on things that I get pretty much everything's been touched on. I think from those 2 points. One of the key ones we talked about really was the focus is that secondary education is really not geared up at all to teach people how to work at all. Like there is no focus on secondary education about giving them any form of inherent job skill and teaching young people how to take care of themselves, how to navigate a workforce. It's all just uni, and if you don't get to uni, you're not successful. That's it. Right? So that's really basic. We all know sitting here that not everyone's geared for uni. Some people aren't wired for that. And there certainly is a need that if we don't create those opportunities or those pathways for young people to get into work earlier, they risk dropping off the employment sphere altogether and creating those barriers. So if we add to that, that's probably the main thing that we talked about as the initial barrier. If you look at from the employment side that's been mentioned, inherent bias is essentially what covers all those, right? So unfortunately as employers, we do have our own biases, and just because we can create a successful business doesn't mean, and you know, we're successful, awesome, we can employ people, how good, doesn't mean we actually understand how to employ people and how to, so one of the things we brought up, and it is changing, because on the apprenticeship and traineeship side, there is about to become mandatory employer mentoring in that whole system, because that is, I think, what you talked about, a lot of those things that our generation and my parents' generation created, and then whinge about us all for, you created the situation. That needs to be addressed, right? So employers need access, and this, as we know, a lot of people here relate to small business. You know, a big business really has no excuse. They've got money. We can go out and get the help, and we can find. I'm not a big business. Sorry, a big business should be able to go out and get the help, but most businesses are small and medium, and they don't necessarily have the sphere to be able to learn the skills required to nurture young people into the workforce. And so, hopefully, we can navigate that change, but that is probably the biggest barrier around the inherent bias.
Great. Thank you so much. Okay, so now Table 4. Who's our spokesperson for Table 4? Is it Mike? So do you have anything to add to what's been you covered?
Yeah, thank you. Very interesting comments about what has transpired so far. In Table 4, we looked at lack of understanding of expectations as a challenge for job seekers, expectations from both the business and also from the job seeker themselves. A lot of our job seekers coming straight out of school or even out of university, their frame of reference for someone in the workplace primarily comes from their parents. Unfortunately, our education system is not set up well in terms of, and I work for a school, so it's not set up well to be able to give students exposure to different professions and what life is like in the workplace. So when they come out and sit in their first job, there's a real hard level of expectations, lack of understanding of expectations from them as to what they're supposed to be doing working, and also from the employer on how to actually induct them, which was what the gentleman before me said. Barriers to employing underrepresented groups. I think also we've got a situation in our education system where we're not actually developing students of character. The kids who sat the HSC this morning, they're looking at up to 9 job or career changes in their work life. So we need to be giving them the skills to be able to be resilient. We need them to be giving them the skills to be able to problem solve, to be able to look at the learning that they're doing at school and solve problems through that learning. So that's one of the barriers. We also spoke about ages and at the other end of the spectrum where despite a lot of experience and ability, there still seems to be that expectation of you're on the shelf if you're over 55 or you're over 60, whereas actually they've got a lot of skills that we can actually utilise. Root cause of barriers. I think that we need to look at our education system and looking at teaching our students micro-credentialing in things like character development. We need to look at their personality, their skills, practical skills, things like getting up in front of people and speaking in a microphone, those type of skills, communication skills. But unfortunately, our system is such that we've got government which we need to adhere to. We've got NESA, we've got TAFE, we've got all sorts of restrictions that are put on our education system, which means that it hasn't changed the way that it needs to. It hasn't kept up with what our community needs it to keep up with. And as a community, we need to be focusing on telling our politicians to bring it into the 21st century, please.
Very good, thank you, well done. Okay, so who's table 5's? Great, thank you, David. Now, I will just preface also something that a lot of people may not be aware of is in this region, particularly in the public school environment, work experience is practically non-existent. Most students cannot find a work experience opportunity in years 10 and 11. And the main reason for that is there's a massive disconnect between the schools and the workplaces and not understanding how to do work experience successfully. So we mentioned before, they're not getting opportunities. This is something that we should, as a group, be looking at how we could solve that problem. David, do you want to touch on anything?
Yeah, and just on that point, I, as a school leader, one of the things I'd say is that it's a regulatory nightmare for schools as well, and it's a regulatory nightmare for you as well. But from our end, from our insurers, from all of our regulations, you know, even things like, do they have working with children? It's like, okay, it's like yet another hoop that we expect you to jump through that we're expected to put you through. So that is a real challenge on multiple levels. Look, lots of the things that we said were things that have already been said. I think, you know, one of the things that we really felt is that experience issue, and just giving kids real world experiences. You know, the micro-credentialing kind of concept and those things are really, really important. You know, from my perspective, one thing I would say though is understanding our job as schools, which is to educate, not to train. And that's a really important thing. Yeah.
I'm a small business owner.
Yeah.
It's a job of parents to parent, and it's a job of schools to teach.
Yeah, in a way. So our job is to educate and to make kids ready to be taught to do something. So we don't make people ready to do something. We make people ready to learn to do something. That's our job. And then TAFE, colleges, universities take that next step. But nonetheless, one of the things we said about that though is we need to have we need to provide kids that are ready to do that. So they've got good collaboration skills, good communication skills. They understand things like it is really important to turn up well dressed and on time, and all of those basic things. And that's where I think micro-credentialing fits in really, really well, because it's super, super important. And I'm a dad of kids that are just finishing their HSC and at that same point as well, so I really agree with that. Some of the barriers though, one of the things I thought that was different that we raised is, and it's a world that I'm not into, but somebody on our table raised is that training programs keep getting cut all the time. So government's introduced some new program, it lasts for 6 months, you start the process and then suddenly the funding's gone. So that kind of constant change of policy, I guess that is, and the funding suddenly disappears and you have this ripped out from under you, and and then you've got to start again with some other program that's offered by some other branch of government, and it becomes really complicated. So I think that's a really big issue. And definitely that point that was raised before around, we use the term stereotypes, use the term bias, same thing, just, the way people perceive, whether it's kids or whether it's older people or whether it's migrants. So, my experience having employed lots of people is the very best employees I've ever had are disabled employees. They're so loyal, they're so, willing to learn, but there's a real perception that they'll be bad employees. So just overcoming some of those kinds of, some of those key stereotypes I think are really important.
Great job. Thank you. Well done, table 5. Thank you. Okay, who's our spokesperson for table 6? So if you can cover anything you think hasn't already been covered.
Yeah, I was just going through, okay, what am I going to say? So, what hasn't been covered? So in the challenges, I'll focus on, and it does link to a few other things, but young people in particular, but it's actually just not young people, can't see the transferability of their skills, whether that's from another job, sports clubs, social groups, whatever it might be, and how do we get them to be able to translate that so that it is actually relevant. That's probably the biggest gap that hasn't actually already been raised. In the barriers to employing, I'm going to group a couple together here, which we started off particularly about COVID and the mental health and social skills deterioration that has affected not just young people, but a lot of people, not all people, a lot of people. But linking that in again to the other side of it, when people do apply for a job and then don't get any information back, even if you don't get an interview, quite often a lot of employers simply say, we will only contact you if you get an interview. It actually becomes a self-perpetuating cycle that there's already a sense of anxiety, nervousness about applying for a job. Maybe there's mental health issues that have been exacerbated by COVID. Then you apply for a few jobs and you hear nothing. And it just keeps spiralling out of control. In today's age, it's not hard to actually give a response. If we're posting jobs on something like Seek or LinkedIn, the functionality is you click the box, and if you've set it up properly, it automatically sends you a message to say, no, you haven't made it, and you can tailor those messages. It's not hard for employers to do that, but it has a big impact if someone doesn't get information. Gaps. Root causes. Last question. We're actually going to probably, maybe it's complexity of the systems. And this brings in things around the 3 tiers of government. It is hard whether you are wanting to employ someone on a visa or someone in disability or work experience. The systems we have created are so complex. And it's also from the other side, if you are someone who has come in perhaps as a foreigner trying to find a job, how do you navigate the Australian system? So from all points, our systems have become so complex and difficult to navigate. Even the issue of, is it the job of schools, universities and TAFE to make students job ready, or to even give them that experience of how jobs work? Because I come from Western Sydney University, so I've got to declare that. So I'm another educator. But university sector as well would typically say, and I don't, that it is not a university's job to give them practical skills. It is their job to teach the academia and the theory behind those skills. As I said, I don't necessarily agree with that one. And there needs to be a change in the way that all of our educational systems, our employment markets actually work and integrate together.
Good job, thank you. Table 6. Okay, we're going to move to our spokesperson for table 7. David, I'll just get you to add anything you think hasn't already been covered so far.
All of the above, pretty much. But quickly, I'll just pick up some of the similarities. So the attitude was one of the challenges for, particularly with young people, where they seem to have a little bit of a belief that they're special, and motivation and entitlement came into it, and lack of communication skills and lack of focus, etc. In the barriers then, we talked about the employer's role in terms of proper onboarding. They do have a responsibility. Employers have a responsibility in terms of accepting the fact that the people coming into the role don't have everything you need for the role. Therefore, they need to be taught and they need to be onboarded. And as I think as Kat said, set up for success with proper onboarding and clarity of expectations, etc. Pregnancy, believe it or not, is still out there, and people are using that as a possible barrier. Where particularly we talked about smaller organisations being hesitant to hire female employees who are young, as the challenge of pregnancy and how that will impact the business, etc. came in. There was also some conversation around discrimination with regards to disability through a lack of understanding and a lack of education by the employer of understanding what a disability actually looks like. What is it? And we talked about we probably all have some sort of disability that's not visible. And lastly, and this probably fits in with table 6, where we talked about the practical skills that come from students leaving university, and the expectation that they will come with those skills. That there's lots of kids coming through now who have a master's degree in marketing, master's degree in accounting. When you ask them to do a P&L or ask them to do a proper marketing plan, they don't have the actual practical skills. And I think we said this situation also arises in construction, where the expression was used that when you walk away from the theory and get into the real world, the ground is not flat. And then finally, there was the parental expectations was around certain nationalities expecting that you will be a doctor. That's where you're going to be. And perhaps TAFE needs a reputation boost to explain the value of TAFE and the value of technical skills. So that was really our conversations that I hope were different to the others.
That's great, thank you. So, well done everyone, because I know we only gave you a very short amount of time. We could really be talking about this forever. But what we're going to do now is we're going to take just a quick 5-minute break, so you can take a pit stop, grab a quick cup of coffee, come sit back down again. And when we get back to our tables, what we're going to get you to do is choose one of those root causes that you discussed at your table, and then you're going to look at what do we think we need to do to maybe address that root cause or that key barrier. And is it a temporary fix, is it a permanent fix, and who should actually be involved in that process or even own that process? So that's what we're going to tackle next in our next session. So you've got 5 minutes to go grab a break and then come on back. Okay, table facilitators, if you can get your team all together, ready to answer the next set of questions. So I'm just going to quickly recap on what we're going to focus on for this part of the session. Thank you. Okay, so your scribe could be the same person, or you could swap it on your table, that's up to you. But what we want to do is we want to tackle all 3 of the questions that we've put there for you as one thought process, okay? So the first part of it is really just thinking about one of those root causes you talked about as a table, so deciding together very quickly what's the one thing you want to focus on. We've given you some examples. For example, is it a technology systems issue? Is it an advocacy policy? Is it a bias issue? Is it there's just no money to solve the problems? Is it education and awareness, or is it maybe access to information? We don't know what we don't know, for example. And then I want you to, as you start reflecting on that and look at, well, what do we need to do to actually address potentially that root cause as a solution? Think about what you need to do to actually address potentially that root cause as a solution. Think about what you need to do to actually address potentially that root cause as a solution. Think about what you need to do to actually address potentially that root cause as a solution. Think about what you need to do to actually address potentially that root cause as a solution. think about whether this is something that you can create a short-term fix on, or if it's a lot more longer term, it's going to take a lot more to tackle. And possibly, is there some things that you immediately have as ideas about how you might put that solution forward? And most importantly, who do we think would need to be involved in that process? What stakeholders are going to be important to that process, or should potentially own that process to drive it as an initiative? So I know there's a lot there, so I'm going to give you a bit of time. We've got about 15 minutes or so for you to unpack that, and we'll be floating around the room if you get stuck and you need to get some clarification. Go for it. Okay, tables. For the little part of the wrap up over the next 3 minutes, if there's somebody at your table who's been a little bit quieter than the rest of your table, okay, everyone listen? 1 moment. If you've got someone at your table who's been a little bit quieter than everybody else at the table, what I want you to do is give them 3 minutes of airtime to share some of their thoughts and capture that so that they feel heard as well. Because we have lots of dominant and really important persons in the room, but we want to actually hear from everyone at your table. So you've got 3 minutes, make sure you give them some airtime. Okay, tables, you've got 1 minute to wrap up this section, and then we're going to do a debrief with each table. Okay, that's time up for this part of the session. So, can I have each of the scribes take your piece of paper, and I'm going to get you to stick it close to where the rest of your information is, and also include your group cause piece of paper and put that back there as well for us. Okay, so who is going to be the spokesperson for Table 1 for this part of the session? Come on up. All right, everyone's attention, please. I'm just going to get you all to keep your debrief to literally 2 minutes, so nice and snappy so we can get through everyone, all right?
So we talked a lot about expectations and perspectives, and we believe that the key to addressing this root cause is bringing together young people or members of the community who have lived experience. Also talking about bringing together councils, education, businesses. So basically bringing everyone together to have a conversation around what this actually looks like and breaking down those barriers to around each other's expectations and how they view things. We believe that it's a long-term process, and we really need to shift fundamental perspectives. And who should be involved? Well, I kind of mentioned that. So young people, businesses, industry, government, and we talked about how council potentially could be a coordinator of that process. And also the RSL Club are doing some really great work in terms of bringing together and piloting new ways to tackle barriers in terms of at-risk young people. So we felt that it's about bringing everyone together to have a really open discussion around what are these barriers and how can we start to work through and shift some of these expectations and perspectives.
Great, good job, table 1. So table 2, who's your spokesperson? You got 3 minutes, Mark. Oh, it's just to your right hand side then. Sorry, it's not in order.
Oh, they're not in order.
It's on.
Hello everybody. Are you going to let me go? I'm having my cataracts taken out on Tuesday morning. I'm walking like a cricket. Just walked out in the balcony. I couldn't read the copy on the chip. So, we sort of came to a couple of conclusions. Some have already been
Wrong way, Mark.
Oh, stop. Point it to me. Give it to me. Where? Oh.
The purple one.
Stop.
I can see it.
Right there.
So, okay. So we looked at obviously like a lot of people the root causes. One of the ones that took my mind a little bit, and I thought we just didn't have a lot of time to sort of go into it, was the lack of family values. I can't go now because the kids have all left home, but we rarely sat down at the dinner table and not had the whole family around. Remember as kids, we'd all come home from school, Dad would be home, Mum would be there, we'd all sit down and talk about what happened during the day or what didn't happen. That doesn't happen, and it very rarely, it does all sit around the dinner table at home is an event. Now you've got to book in advance, and the kids have got to figure out which girlfriend or whatever they're taking out this week, and when he comes over, all he does is rave a bar and watch TV, so he's not much use of the house. But I think some of the solutions that we looked at is to clarify the roles and make really clear what people need to know and what to do, because some people just do what they want to do. But if there's some structure around some of those roles, it gives people framework that they can say, okay, I'm going too far, just pull back a little bit and straighten it out. If you've got a whole group of people doing that, I think you've got a far better opportunity to get some gel back into this, back into the community, in essence. Some of the other stuff have already been covered. One of the ones I thought was interesting, how many kids now, our kids go and play sport. We had to go to the Cubs, we had to go to the Scouts as kids. I remember picking us up from footy training, dancing. Not, I didn't do dancing, but the other girls in the family did. So, and they're sort of some of the simple things that just block that we just seem to pass over. So that's my 3 minutes.
So you're suggesting that what we need to do is look at education, possibly for parents, on how to
I think,
equip their kids, and look at how we're using maybe sporting groups and other facilities as conduits as well for education.
I think so. I think the more participation in what we do, it's got to be a win for everybody.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Thank you. Well done, table 2. Okay, so who is our spokesperson for table 3?
I'll keep going.
You don't know table 3?
He knows
I'm
about
good.
it. He's good.
I'm good. I'm like you, I just wing it, mate. No, we figured that obviously a lot of us have views on education. That's always a big thing here. And so we want to talk more about the business perspective, or something that could actually help within this room. And that comes down to the mentoring, and especially when you look at, it covers all the area, all the barriers that were mentioned in here. If you're talking about young people, disabilities, culturally diverse, all that kind of stuff can be helped through good, specific mentoring. And the reason we talked about that, I think Raj, this was his part, but this whole thing about thinking local. So even Telstra, a large organisation like that, prioritises on having people within their own communities reach out and do that kind of work. And so it's something that the Chamber, Council together, being able to find some way of, the big part is, yes, we have things like this that engage and we talk and all that, but let's be honest, a lot of businesses don't do things unless they're going to get paid, right? And so there is a focus of being able to get some form of government funding or grant system in there so that businesses that really need help and want to take on these challenges of hiring young people, hiring people with disabilities, hiring culturally diverse people, older people, all that kind of stuff, can get access to a mentor. And that mentor, if they need to, can get paid for the time and all that kind of stuff, to be providing ongoing support through the journey of taking these people on. And having the power of the Chamber or having council themselves to build up to get that push into government to be able to gain those grants and get those wider access, I think is probably that solution. Thank you.
Great idea. Okay, thank you. All right, so table 5, who is your spokesperson?
Sorry. Okay, we kind of looked at awareness as an issue as well, and then talked about just how many millions of pathways there are, but getting to know what all of those pathways actually are, and how to connect with those. So we just talked about lots of different things, authentic connections to work, having role models, like we talked about how there are multiple ways to get into careers, but there's very traditional ways of thinking, and when you see other people that have entered a career through different pathways, actually realising that those things exist. And very much like what the group just before just said, that idea of having local connections. So we were just talking, a day like today, to be honest, we've already, my colleague and I have made connections with people that are going to benefit our students. So I think those kinds of local connections are really important, because it's, if you do it at a state government level or something, it's going to be so high level that you walk out and it's like some policy thing that you don't really connect with. So those kinds of really like micro level connections are really important. So changing those kinds of thinkings around it, and your idea about having, we talked a little bit on our table about just how many kids don't have access to things like careers advisors anymore. They don't exist in lots of schools. They do luckily in our schools, but in many schools they don't. And what does an adult do? They don't have careers advisors. So that idea of mentoring and having that, I think, is really sustainable as well. Thanks.
Fantastic. Good job, table 5. Table 6. Did I skip one?
Skip 4.
Oh, sorry. 4.
So we looked at the root cause being education and awareness and access to information. We just came up with the idea that one of the gentlemen on our table works for Service New South Wales. So why don't we get Service New South Wales to start creating, or government to start creating some job-ready courses for our young people, giving them the skills that they can actually utilise in the workplace. So communicated through schools and TAFE, you could even build it in so it's something that someone does after the HSC finishes in early November, and they do that. And building that in conjunction with industry, obviously. So not just government telling people this is what you need to do, but actually having partnering with industry, trades, people in this room to actually create it. looking at creating it in a way that's actually interactive, using video, using different methods of communication. Looking also at some parent training. I think, like what was said before, I think the family is the basis of any community, that family unit. But maybe training our parents to make sure their kids are okay to make a mistake. It's actually good for them to make a mistake in life, make several mistakes, because that's what happens in adulthood. And giving them some skills on how to best prepare their kids for life after school and in the workforce. And also giving our young people that independence to be able to, rather than look at their phone saying, I want this, I want this, I want this, actually have that independence to, you know, in order to get that, you need to do X, Y, and Z. So,
Great job, thank you. So, We've got 3 minutes, so.
Okay, we were going to start with the root cause of all ills, which was government and society, but we gave up and decided to focus on place, being where we are. So, we're really looking at, and this has sort of been touched on, I think, by group 1, I think it's table 1, I think it was, around the collaboration between business, educators, government, and job seekers / students. To look at and particularly a pool of employers from that side that are willing to take on students to have placements and experience of some sort. And through that to then pull together with those in that collaboration, the financial support for employers and also job seekers to undertake education and gain experience. And in doing so, once they have undertaken their education and that experience within the education time, to actually have a job at the end of it. So we're in creating that more structured, collaborative environment, we're actually solving, we think, we should be able to solve a number of the problems that were addressed and raised across all of the groups. I think that's it. And a voucher for young people to engage with local businesses, to gain that experience of the local workforce, the local employers, to be able to stay at place.
Great, okay. Well done. Table 7.
Thank you. Can you still see us? All right, we picked discrimination. We started calling it stereotype, but then we said that's a bit soft, so let's call it discrimination, because that's what it is. And that can be ageism, that can be male, female, that can be migrants. So what we said the barriers were lack of understanding and a fear. And we also, so we spoke about overcoming that, and we spoke about it's really exposure to that. And I was talking to the team on my table. I spent this morning at a TAFE college with a painting group, some painters and decorators. There was 10 guys and only 1 female. I watched the female was by far the best. Now that's that exposure, because that's women in trade, and we would have thought that the guys were better. No way. So that's that exposure to stereotypes. So that's one way of overcoming it, exposure. We also spoke about policy and regulation, and we actually believe it's over-legislated now. There is far too much policy around discrimination, and that's causing some fear and some barriers where people are actually staying away from territory because it's too much legislation in there. And Mark, and we've actually said this a few times, this has to start at home. How we do that, but this has to start at home with parents. Thank you.
Very good, well done. Okay, so today has been a bit of a whirlwind snapshot to get us into the first stage of this process. So I want to thank you all for all of your contributions. And as you can say, there's lots of information there, but what there also is probably lots of ideas and thought bubbles are going off in your head about possible solutions, problems, the gaps that you may not have covered today adequately. So what we would like you to do is over this next week, put some of those thoughts down and send us through an email. We'll do a follow-up email for today, obviously, to thank you, but we'd love you to respond to that with any input and feedback and ideas you might have, because we want to contribute that beyond today into that conversation and gather that all together. Now, the intention from today is not that, okay, this is a one-off, we're not going to do this again. We've started something here, and I hope you found it valuable to sit in a room with different types of stakeholders and start having these conversations. So we're looking to continue this on. We'll probably do another forum like this in early new year. We'll be doing that in the Hawkesbury, because this is truly a regional approach. It's not just about the hills, it's also about the entire northwest of Sydney. It's a bit of a pilot program. There are other chambers and councils who are looking at what we're doing here and hoping that we come up with some really amazing solutions that they can look at, piloting in their own regions as well. So anything that you see coming from different regions you think is worth adding to this process, we're obviously interested in. So you will all be invited to that next forum, but you'll also be invited to continue to participate. Now, there is a couple of themes that I've seen just from your discussions today, and I think one of the key themes for me is that there's obviously a lack of clarity about who actually does what and what the gaps are between those. There's a lot of assumptions that get made about what is education's role, what's council's role, what's chamber's role, what's the employer's role, but nobody actually really seems to actually know what that is. And I think that's because there's no clarity around those demarcation points. And one of the things I think we'd like to address broadly is getting a better understanding, because if we all understand what we're supposed to be doing, that'll make it far easier for job seekers and students and people who are looking to return to work, as well as each of the different people who work within your organisations, understanding where do you begin, where do you end, and where are there truly gaps that we need to push for support and funding to actually address. So that's one of the things I saw today out of discussions. So before we finish up today, I'm going to get you to do a couple of things. First of all, I'm going to, on your table, you'll see a QR code. I'd like you to get your phones out for me. And I'd like you to give us some feedback. So just give that a scan and give us some feedback on how you've experienced today. If there's any further feedback you'd like to give us more individually or go into any detail, then please do send us through an email. We'd really love to hear from you. And whilst you're doing that, I just want to thank all of my fellow chamber representatives who've supported today's event, not just here today, helping to facilitate. So thank you all for the great job you did, but also they've done a lot of work behind the scenes. This has been a process that began 12 months ago, where we started talking about this as a challenge and how we might go about fixing it. I'd also like to thank the Hills Shire Council and the Wexpo team who supported this forum for us today. To our Mayor, Peter, thank you very much for participating today and supporting us. And the Council's Economic Development team, Steve, if you haven't met Steve Garrard, and his team are here today, so please make sure you touch base with them. If you could take a couple of moments to scan the QR, and then we're officially finished, but I think there's still a bit of coffee in the urn, so if you feel like sticking around for a few minutes. I know Wexpo doesn't finish till 5, so we don't have to run out of the room. There's nobody in here after us, so if you want to stay and chat and get to know a few people for a little bit longer, you're welcome to do so. But I thank you all for your participation, your contribution today, and we'll see you again soon.